You are watching Influence Media, PSI TV, the Netflix of biz brands.
Leadership. It is a crazy concept that a lot of people seem to think is super easy to do. I am just floored by how many people start businesses or get moved up into leadership position without any formal training, without any even mentorship. And when they fail, everybody, including them, are surprised. I am just floored. And being one of those people in the past, I've started businesses that failed and I had no training. I may have been skilled at what I did, but I had no training in running a business. So in full disclosure, I am a doctoral candidate and I am getting ready to do my research. And this conversation, which these gentlemen have been so amazing to offer to help me, yes, this conversation is initially triggered because I need content and direction for my research. However, I anticipate that you all will benefit from the conversation here because these are three stellar leaders in their space. So let me go ahead and introduce them to you, starting with Rocky Romanella. Rocky is a returning guest to PSI TV, and he is the founder and CEO of 360 Management Services, LLC, a management consulting firm specializing in executive speaking, leadership development, and consulting services. He's also the author of the book, Tighten the Lug Nuts, an Amazon bestseller and critically acclaimed book. Prior to this, he was a CEO who led one of the largest rebranding initiatives in franchising history, the UPS Store, revolutionizing the 9 billion with a B, retail shipping and business services market. Rocky, thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure.
Then we have Dr. Peter James. Dr. Peter James was my personal at Lynch University. He taught me, so he knows a little bit about my work and the way I think and all of that. So, but he was a U.S. Army veteran, and he is an ICF certified and credentialed executive leadership coach. He focuses on helping executives and businesses transform in life, career, and business, especially around the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, leadership development, and executive leadership coaching. Last but not least, Stephen Howard, also a returning PSI TV guest. Guys, what do you see here? These are people that I know, like, and trust. Okay, I invited them for a reason. Okay, so he is the author of 22 leadership, business, and professional development books. Stephen is a Nonfiction Authors Association award winner and for a book called Human Leadership, and that's a word he coined. And if you want to know what that is, watch the show I did with Stephen. Stephen was named one of 2023's top 200 global biggest voices in leadership in recognition of his thought-provoking and leading-edge thinking on leadership. He was named to the 2023 CREA, CREA list of top influential leaders for his thought leadership and his writing. Gentlemen, I appreciate that you have given me your time today. I so thank you.
Well, thank you for the invite.
All right. So as I said, guys, I am needing help to kind of guide my research thoughts, and it's primarily around the area of leadership competence. The leadership conversation could really go in a million different directions. So we're going to kind of focus in on the competence aspect of this. So let me start. Startups usually have the founder wearing many hats. Been guilty. And often that is because the business has not yet made enough money to pay for help. For example, the accountant that has opened up their tax service, they're an expert in taxes. They've opened up their tax services, but they know nothing about getting clients or managing those customers. Until people are immersed in business, they usually don't know what they're in for until they're into it. And many employees assume leaders are just relaxing in their executive chairs with an easy agenda. The general point I'm getting at, guys, is it is my opinion that people seem to think leadership is easy. Do you agree? Do you think that people think leadership is easy?
I will say the biggest thing that people don't understand is what leadership's all about. I think you hear a title, so people assume leadership is, I have to have somebody reporting to me. I have to be able to manage them or manage a situation. Leadership is something we all have concerns about. And I think at the end of the day, leadership is the concept of, do you leave things a little better than you found them? Are people better because of their time with you? Is the organization better because of your stewardship? Are your customers better because they did business with you? And so based on that, we're all leaders at one time or another, whether it's in the PTA, whether, it's on the block we live, we're all leaders at one time or another. So I think the answer is everybody thinks what everybody else is doing is easy.
Okay.
And the one thing you learn in life, there are no easy jobs. Every job has with its challenges. And so the answer, I think, quickly would be, I think everybody thinks what everybody else is doing easily, or certainly not what they're doing. So,
okay, Stephen, what do you think?
I think people do think it's easy. I think those who talk about leadership and sometimes write about leadership, they make it more, what's the word I'm looking for? Complicated than it is. Leadership is complex, but it doesn't need to be complicated. We complicate it with models and phrases, and everybody comes up with a new phrase, trusted leadership, values-based leadership, servant leadership, on and on and on. And everyone's trying to keep up on the roller coaster of what's the latest thing I should be doing as a leader. But leader is, and what Rocky says, he says about leaving things better than we were. I think it's about leaving people better. And if you leave people better than they were, then the organization will be better than it was. And my philosophy is very simple. You don't manage people, you manage things, you manage processes, policies, projects, procedures, but you lead people. And I say that not quite facetiously. There are times you have to manage people. And, you talk about leadership competency, one area I would recommend thinking about is what's the difference between a leadership competency and a managerial competency? And to me, they're very distinct differences.
Peter?
Yeah, I love great conversation, great responses from both Rocky and Stephen. Initially, the answer to your question is yes. Many people think that leadership is easy. And to Rocky's point, they think that what they see other people doing, I could do that. I could do better.
Yeah.
I can be better than they were or they are. But unless you're in those shoes, you never know. Right. And so one of the things that I really attribute to halfway good leadership is evolution and self-awareness. The greatest of leaders have to evolve, adapt to what their environments need, what their scenarios need. But they also must be self-aware of who they are and their capabilities and how they can improve as leaders or managers, as even Stephen has mentioned there, right? So it's a bit of evolution, but also self-awareness in order to leave things and people better off than when we began.
When I was in a lower level of some jobs I've had, I've heard coworkers say, "What's she doing in there all day? She's just relaxing in her chair." A lot of people think that I've been around, and this is anecdotal because I haven't done the research on it, but I have found that people think that the leader, the boss, is just sitting in their office and just sending out orders, and that they have this easy, cushy job. And that's a lot of the reasons why a lot of people want to take a leadership role, only to discover they're so inept. That's just my thoughts. Was someone else going to jump in and say something on that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, just as I was listening to, the conversation with Stephen and Peter, if you think about it, I mean, it really comes down to this concept, I think, and you really have to understand who you are as a person, what you stand for as a person, and then what are the things you won't compromise. And clearly, your companies need to do those same things. But if you think about it, who am I? what do I stand for, and what are the things I won't compromise is so important, because along this journey of leadership, and I think Stephen said it best, you kind of grow into it, and Peter said it, you kind of evolve as a leader. But as you're evolving and growing, you still have to keep that little sheet of paper next to you that says, well, who am I? What do I stand for? And what won't I compromise? And companies need to do the same thing. And if you think about companies that got themselves in trouble, I mean, if we walk into a company that has got, think about Wells Fargo, over 150-year-old company, right? I'm sure if we walked in there, there's plastered all over the cafeteria boards who we are. I mean, they got mission statements, what we stand for. They got value statements. You got 800 numbers. But at the end of the day, number 3 was the one that you really have to. Question number 3 is the one you really got to answer, what we won't compromise. And you're going to get challenged on that as a person, as a leader, as well as a company. And I think when you think about those 3, when you think about the things that we all, not knowing each other, different styles, different experiences, we all kind of summarized this whole concept of you really got to know who you are, what you stand for, and what you won't compromise as an individual, which then helps you as you grow through your leadership journey.
Interesting you use Wells Fargo, because they have been guilty of not being clear on what they will compromise. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Let's go on to the next thing here. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 18% of small businesses fail within the first year, and 50% fail after 5 years, and by year 10, 65% have failed. So in your opinion, how much does leadership competence contribute to this statistics that the Bureau of Labor is reporting?
Trudy, I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier when you talked about the tax planner or the tax accountant. They don't know, they don't have competency in sales. They don't have competency in customer service. They don't have competency, maybe even in certain paperwork, legal aspects of running a business. So it's not that the leadership competency, I think it's the competency that they don't have all the skill sets to run a business. And, look, I've been running my own businesses now for over 30 years, but in my case, I have to hire a tax accountant because I don't know anything about taxes. And in my case,
let me challenge you on that. Is that a leadership competence issue? Because the tax expertise is a specific skill set versus leadership, because if that tax accountant was staying in her cubicle and doing taxes, she might do an excellent job, but leading a tax business is a different, in my mind as a student, is a different competence than a specific skill set competence. Am I wrong in that?
No, it is a difference. But you talk about leadership. I mean, how many times in my career have I seen great sales leaders, people who, top of the peak in their company in sales, and they get appointed as sales director? Well, they don't know how to lead people. They know how to sell. They know how to sell their way.
That's what I was getting at. So
exactly.
That's what I'm getting at. So that is a question I want answered.
Yeah, they're different. They're different skill sets. They're different. And going back to what Rocky said about knowing yourself, and Peter as well, I know myself. I know I don't have, for instance, I don't have a skill set to be a graphic designer. I'm a great writer. A good writer.
I have an opinion. I want to hear, Peter, what do you think? I want to hear what you say.
Yeah, I got to go back. So I love what was just mentioned a second ago about leadership. And even those who are running their own business, their own startup, they're leading their startup. So now let me go back to that response that I gave you before about evolution and self-awareness, right? And now if I am very self-aware, to Stephen's credit, if I'm very self-aware that I don't have the ability, and I need to know this sooner rather than later, the quicker I can know this, the better. I can't do my taxes, right? I can't do my bookkeeping. I can't manage my calendar as well as I think I need to. The sooner that I can come to that realization, that self-awareness, the better than I can surround myself with the right people to help my business grow.
Yes.
We see leaders fail because they're stuck that they can do it all oftentimes, when in fact...
Let's not develop that side of it yet. So Rocky, let me hear what you have to say.
Well, I think two great points there, the two great comments. I would say that small businesses, and it happens in large organizations as well. It happens to individuals as leaders, but I would say in the small business arena, they violate the rule of do not allow your strength to become your weakness. Now, what's the strength of a small business owner? No one's more vested. No one knows the business better than they do. No one cares more than they do. What's their weakness? Nobody knows the business better than they do. No one's more vested than they are. No one cares more than they do. So their strength becomes their weakness. And so it's that ability to move outside of that. At some point, as your small business is growing, you're going to have to get out of the tactical side of the business and start to begin that process of a strategic vision. And so I would say the first thing is don't allow your strength to become your weakness. And secondly, the question you have to answer to yourself is, what is the biggest thing I know? The biggest thing you know is what you don't know. And the minute you understand what it is that you don't know and are willing to accept what you don't know, whether you're the CEO of a company or whether you are the startup of Joe Scafone's Pizzeria, at the end of the day, you have to A, not allow your strength to become your weakness, and B, you have to address what is the biggest things I don't know? And then you have to be willing to ask for that help. And as Stephen said, at the end of the day, for me, I'm not going to be the chief sales guy. I'm going to go out and help people win business, but I'm not a salesperson. I mean, I'm not good at accounting. I mean, I understand finance is obviously running large businesses inside of UPS, but at the end of the day, I'm looking for the CFO I need. I need a general counsel that really knows how to, understands what it takes to be a general counsel. And then the minute that you're willing to accept the things that you don't know and seek the help and advice, it's empowering to you. It's not a sign of weakness. It's empowering you. You empower yourself, and then you're empowering those people inside those different functions that you're asking for help for.
So I'm sure you guys have heard of or read that Rich Dad Poor Dad book. What's the writer?
Kiyosaki.
Yeah. Okay, and I think this is probably what's influencing my thought in that. So when the startup gives themselves a job, they think they are running a business. They've just given themselves a job. But when they start to hire those people, that's when they're actually running the business, and they have to lead these people. They have to lead and sometimes manage if they don't have the manager in place. So in my mind, when I say leading, I may be the expert accountant and I want to start my accounting firm, and I am the top skill in the management in doing accounting and keeping the books. But when it comes to leading my business, leading the thing, and I'm assuming at this point, it's not just a job anymore. I have a virtual assistant. In ours, when it's just me, I don't see that as a business. So maybe I should just make that clear. I don't see when I'm just self-employed as a business. At this point, there are other people in the equation, which means whether I'm the expert in accounting or not, I know I have people that I have to figure out. And if I'm not doing a good job with that, then my business is going to crumble, because I've heard so many people complain. They're just told, go do this. They've never done it before. They don't get good mentorship. My daughter right now, I won't say where she's at, but when she started her job at this firm, they took her in knowing she had certain expertise. They made a lot of assumptions about her capability, handed her some projects, and she was staring at the computer screen with blank stares. And when she asked questions, there was no response. She finally found a coworker who was able to show her some things, but because it was a remote job, even finding that remote worker that would help her was hard. And it's just a mess when it comes to me. The whole leadership game for me exceeds and steps out of my expertise in my unique area. And as Peter said, knowing that self-awareness, say, hey, I'm good at accounting, but I really don't know much about anything else. I really need the help in XYZ. But the thing is that I've seen so many startups frozen, not even knowing who their first hire should be, and when they hire that person, what that person should do. So I kind of guess that's what I'm thinking about, is the cause why these businesses are failing. They need the help, They may not know they need the help. They don't have the self-awareness. They have the self-awareness. They don't have the money. They have the money. They have the self-awareness. They don't know who to hire. They don't know how to direct that person. I am thinking. That's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? Am I wrong?
I always say that a business is not doing well until they start hiring people, bringing people in to assist. You think about that, the individual who's doing it by themselves, sure, they are, sometimes the IRS likes to call them a hobby, right? But when you are bringing other people in to support, whether it is on a 1099 or a W-2, that's when scaling really begins to happen. Until that time, you doing it by yourself, I have a question mark. That's just me, though.
And it's from the Commerce Institute, and it's talking about all the new businesses that are started each year, and that's in the United States. So new businesses are starting each year by the millions, knowing that many of them will fail in year one and not make it to year 7. What are these leaders missing? What should these startups know before they risk their life savings, max out their credit cards, probably even take out a loan on their homes only to lose everything?
I would highly recommend that they take Rocky's advice and know what they don't know. And that's a question they should be asking themselves every 3 months. What don't I know? And then about my product, my competition, my people, the business environment, whatever it is. That I think one of the problems with leaders is they think they have to have all the answers. Yeah. And I think good leaders have better questions than answers many times.
Ooh. Oh, that's a great point.
Love that.
I think the other thing is that, when you think about running a business, whether it's a mature business or a large business, small business, or a brand new business, at the end of the day, I think you always kind of start out, and I know I'll say this often, which maybe is just shows how boring I am, but you got to have lists, right? So for me, I always want to have the list of the nice to do things and need to do things, right? And in business, we all love to do nice to do things, right? And so you're starting a business and you've got all these things to do, and you tend to focus on the nice to do things. Oh, I need business cards. Oh, it'd be nice to paint the place. Oh, it'd be nice to do this. It'd be nice to do that. Okay, but the need to do is I got to get revenue, right? And how much expense can I have? And how much do I have in working capital? And so those are all things that generally entrepreneurs, especially, entrepreneurs that are starting out for the first time, they're the idea people. And that's their strength. They got great ideas, by the way. And you think about some of the businesses that started up that when you initially heard of those businesses, you're like, man, why can't I ever think of that stuff? Like right? Would you ever like, man, I can't believe it. What's wrong with me? Maybe the nuns in the grammar school were right. I'm just not that smart. I mean, who knows, right? But then they don't make it. Well, they don't make it because the initial great ideas they have started it. But then that whole concept of what help do I need? What is it that I don't know? And so I think that when you start a business, there's probably, what are those things I need to take care of? I got to have an operating plan. I got to have a business plan. I got to have working capital. Nobody talks about that. They talk about, I got this great idea. I need to find a place to do it at. Even like, e-commerce. I want to start up an e-commerce. This is great. And all of a sudden they come in one day and it's bing, 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 bing. Believe me, I've been there during my e-commerce days at UPS. Bing, 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 bing. Hey, I didn't think we were going to get that many packages. Yeah. So good news is we got customers. Bad news is we got customers.
Yeah. If I can
ever go to, hey, listen, you guys can relate to this. Ever go to a restaurant and it's all of a sudden one night you're in this restaurant. It's a pretty good place. Been there a couple of times. And next thing you know is the food's taking forever. And you say, hey, what's going on tonight? Oh, we're really busy tonight. What'd you think was going to happen? Weren't you kind of hoping that? All right, so now your problem became my problem. Now, what happens when their problems becomes our problems? We just leave as a customer. But whenever they tell me, oh, we're really busy tonight, I'm thinking, well, I was kind of, well, that's what happens in small businesses. Oh, we're really busy now. Oh, okay, isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, I love that. Or Rocky, when you've been to that restaurant, then one day you try to go to that restaurant and it's gone.
Yeah.
What happened? What happened? And maybe and 9 times out of 10, they haven't been running their money, their financials well enough to include their rent payments and paying their people and all the moving parts that come with a restaurant someone dropped the ball somewhere. So two things, if I could also piggyback on Stephen, knowing what you don't know, but how do you know that? How do you figure that out? My answer to that is, who are you surrounding yourself with? A coach, a mentor, an advisor, somebody else who is in your ear to tell you that's crazy, or you need to be taking that into consideration. But oftentimes we think that we know it all. And then the other thing, for if you're really brand new, your focus should be on revenue, because I still see so many people worried about the wrong thing. My structure, what my napkins look like, revenue, and then begin to make, it's almost like building the plane while you're on the runway, taking off. And you have to take into consideration all of the small things, as Rocky mentioned, to ensure that when people are wrapped around the building coming to you, that you can take care of them all with the best quality service.
It's nice to do things, right?
Yeah. And there was a young man that I helped some time ago. He had a successful lawn service, but then he got this girlfriend, and as the money came in, he was spending it on her. And the next thing is he didn't have the money for the parts when the blades broke, and next thing he knew, he was out of business. And I was like, how? You were so successful. You had all these clients. So like what Peter said, somewhere along the line, again, running his business without the basics of what it takes to run the business. Well, fantastic. So let's go on. So assuming you've had some business failure at some point, or you're aware of it at some organization you've been a part of, how does business failure, and this is going to have a part B, how does business failure affect the confidence and mindset of an organizational leader? Let's stick with that part first. How does it affect them when they've failed? You're the leader and it's failed.
I'll jump in first. 95% of people who start their business don't think about the failure aspect of it. And so when that does happen, what does that do to your psyche? What does that do to your mindset? Are you flexible, adaptable enough to pivot, start again, shift? Most people are not. Most people will go the safe route. And the safe route is going to find a job where you're paid every 2 weeks. Right? And that's why being a W-2 employee is the majority of people in our society, because that check every 2 weeks is safe. And you have to be able to have that mindset around not being safe in order to survive in this type of entrepreneurial environment.
I don't like universal answers, Trudy. I mean, it really depends on the individual. It's kind of like, use an analogy, it's kind of like a divorce. Some people have a divorce and it's like, oh my God, my relationships, my life is terrible. I'll never date again, blah, blah. Other people get divorced and like 3 weeks later, you see them in a bar on a date. So everyone's different.
I would say that whether it's as an entrepreneur or whether it's in a business, whether it's in a, as an employee in a big business, whatever it is, to me, there's three times in everyone's career. And, if you make it 20, 20, and 60. So 20% of the time, everything you touch turns to gold. It's going to happen once, twice, maybe in a long career. I mean, I was 36 years at UPS, and then now it's 10, 11 years since I retired from UPS. I ran a company after that. And I got to tell you, 20% of the time, it don't happen too often. So when everything you touch turns to gold, enjoy it, but realize it's not going to happen very long, and it's not going to happen very often. And then there's 60% of the time, things are going well. They're relatively good. They're not relatively bad or relatively good. And that's the time when you're always trying to, kind of think of, okay, I better think about what's going to happen when we move out of this, things are just going good phase, because it's probably not going to be everything turns to gold, because that happened once already. So now it's the last piece. And the last piece is you're just hanging on for dear life. Nothing that you do works. It's like if you're playing baseball, you walk up, sometimes it looks like a beach ball, sometimes it looks like a marble. What do you do how do you get out of that, slump? How do you get out of that downturn? Business was going great. I thought we were in that zone. Never really thought we'd ever have a downturn like this. And then boom, this happens, that happens, regulations happen, unfortunate COVID happen, whatever happens, but you're in that 20%, you're holding on for dear life. Everybody has to go through that, sadly, because the only way you have the stories that tell people it's okay, we're going to get through this, is by having gone through that. And that's what builds your character. It doesn't define your character, it exposes it. It shows you really who you are as a person, right? Can I handle myself through this? Can I work through it? Do I treat people with dignity and respect during the difficulty? Or am I just a ranter and raver and I'm pounding the desk because things aren't going well? How do I handle that difficulty says more about you as a leader than how do I handle the good times. And I think that's the part we all have to go through. And people tell you, I've never had that 20%, they're just lying to you, or they haven't had it, but they're going to have it. I'm telling you, we all are going to have that moment where, you know, it doesn't make any sense. You're working for someone that no matter what you say, you don't connect with them. You can't do anything right in their eyes, and you got to manage through that. And you can't always just walk away. And I think that's the time when you really start to develop your character, you develop who you are, you develop what you stand for, and what are the things you won't compromise, because they may put you in a position that, you know, they want you to look the other way on some numbers. You can't do that, right? So I think so those three times in your life, I think, are so important, whether as an entrepreneur or whether it's as a, you know, think about all these people who talk about failure. There was always that moment in time where it could have been the failure, but then something changes, right? They do something, and that's that moment where they realize, I'm not giving up, or I'm going to do this differently, or something's going to change.
So 3 things have come to mind coming out of what you gentlemen have said. The first one is risk. And risk tolerance is huge. And that speaks to the safeness of getting that W-2 job versus the average entrepreneur. I think, unless they were forced, they didn't have, like, I have a friend with lupus and she couldn't get a job, so she became an entrepreneur, but not a willing one. But the people who gravitate to being their own boss, running their own business, I think have a higher risk tolerance, and they're willing to take the chance and forego the safety of the W-2. The other thing that I picked up from all 3 of you is there's a mindset component to leadership that probably we need to discuss a little bit further down in this conversation. And the third thing is, as came out real strong with you, Rocky, is identity. Who we see ourselves as is going to pour out, is going to be exposed in these times versus, you know, anything else. So thank you so much for that. Those are 3 important pieces that I think I'm going to include in my work: risk, identity, and mindset, for sure. So the second part to that question, which may pick up in some of the answers you're going to give now, is what does it take? What does it take to make that comeback? And what needs to be different when that person who's had the failure, like you said, Stephen, goes to the bar 3 weeks later and they're back on the track? You know, what is it what does it take to make that comeback, and what has to be different the next time around?
Go back to our original conversation, the beginning of the conversation, knowing yourself, taking accountability, to add what Rock was talking about, I think your 3 points there. Accountable. I mean, I know people who can say, I know people close their businesses and they blame COVID. I know a woman who lost her job just weeks before COVID. Obviously couldn't get a new job during COVID. She wrote 3 books. She pivoted, to use Peter's word there. She just changed what she was doing. And now she's got all kinds of opportunities, people knock on her doors for all kinds of things, because she published 3 books in 3 years. So it's taking accountable. So, you know, you can blame COVID for your business. You can blame, I hired these people didn't do what they're supposed to do. The bank dried up my funds. You can come all kinds of excuses, or you can say, you know what? I didn't manage my cash flow very well. I didn't anticipate what would happen. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have a plan B if something were to happen. You know, I didn't anticipate Russia would invade Ukraine. Well, you can anticipate a worldwide crisis is going to happen at any given point. in time? And how would you react if there's a worldwide crisis? We've had two now in 2 years. We've had the situation in Ukraine, and now the day that we're recording this, I think we're in day 3 of the situation in the Middle East. So things are going to happen. You got to be accountable for it. Or how do you respond to it?
Anybody else? Come back.
There's a reason that sports is very analogous to business, or is spoken a lot in comparison to business. One of the things I admire about athletes, especially professional athletes, is that in order for them to be successful, they have to do a good job of forgetting their past failures. Right? They have to, in order to perform better the next day. But now let me add another caveat to that. They have to be able to learn from their past failure and simultaneously forget about it in order to perform the next day. As a business owner, we have to be very cognizant of forgetting about the thing where we fell down, learn from it, forget it, be better the next day, understand what's going on in our environment, adapt, be flexible, approach it for the benefit of our clients the next day. And I think that's one of the things that still so many people can't do. They can't forget. They hold on to it. And that's a mindset challenge. That's a fixed mindset challenge to Stephen's point a little bit earlier. How can you shift that to more of a growth mindset?
Just to add a little bit. So I'll take it from a kind of different perspective. It's conversations when, I'm managing an organization or managing a group. And I will tell you the strangest look I've gotten from people who, I've managed or have been in my care. I never believe people work for you. They're in your care as the leader. And so, but they'll sit there at a business plan review and they'll go through all the reasons why they missed their plan. And so they'll go through that whole process with you, and they'll articulate it, they'll go through it, and it's succinct. They've got PowerPoint presentations. And at the end, the thing that, they'll look at me and I'll say, well, I understand why you're off plan, but I don't accept why you're off plan. And they'll look at me and they'll say, well, that doesn't make any sense. What do you mean? You understand why I'm off plan? Well, I understand why you're off plan, but I don't accept it because there were things that you could have done along the way to get back on plan. And if I accept you not doing anything to correct the plan or to correct where you were going, then what I'm doing is I'm being disrespectful to the individuals who did make the corrections. So they changed the way they were looking at things. They changed, think about, as Stephen said, during COVID, right? How many people business today are completely different than when they entered COVID, but they found a way to do takeout. They found a way to do this. They found a way to do that. They changed, how they went about doing their business, right? Because they didn't accept the answers. They said, okay, we understand we're off. Now we have to change. And it's interesting. And so many people who worked for me over the course of time would come to me later on and say, I never appreciated that one business planning meeting until I left, saying, all right, well, I guess I better figure out how to get back on plan because he's not accepting it. Now, I understand there are things that are outside your control, but when there are things that are in your control and you could have done them, the minute I accept that as a leader, then what's happening is I'm being disrespectful to the people who have made the changes. I don't think that's fair to the people who have made the changes. And then you have to do that same accountability. You have to have that same accountability for yourself, right? So I would sit there and say, well, look, I hold myself to the same standards. I'm not happy with where we are as an organization. And the things I look back now and think, I should have done this. And because, the thing that people don't realize is you can't put the seatbelt on after the airbag goes off. Right? You can't tell me you should have done this 6 months ago, right? I understand you probably could have, but you didn't. So I think that that's another part of it, right? It's what we've talked about in this segment, but it's also about that self-accountability and then the accountability you hold other people to as a leader, which then helps them grow and develop by understanding, hey, I'm just not going to show up with all the reasons why it didn't happen. I better understand what I'm going to do differently to begin the process of making it happen.
That is leading right there. And I'll have to say that even my show, because I started in 2019, And when COVID happened, I had to switch to Zoom. But Zoom has been great because I wouldn't be talking to y'all today if Zoom didn't pick up like it did, and people would, because I thought, I can't get to the TV studio. Now what, right? And here we are. So fantastic. All right. So next one, when a business fails, what are some of the hard costs that come with that? And I want us to look at it from the ecosystem, organizational level, and the personal level, because I kind of talked about it before about, people, sometimes when people start their business, they literally leverage everything they've got.
Yeah, so I'll jump on in. Of course, there's initially what comes to mind for me is the financial aspect of it, for sure. The hit that someone has taken as a result of having a failure, or the business declining, what that investment looked like, maybe what that loan looked like. If you took out a loan on your home, and more, something like that, to a certain extent, that's definitely a big thing. You're right. There's an ego thing. We won't dive on into that because you have to have the right mindset for that. But then also, what else might come with that if you have employees? What does that do to you and your future of launching another business? What might that do to someone else who is looking to you for inspiration, but now they see you have failed? Now, are they more apt to dive on in? Or do they have the mindset to be able to say, hey, here's what I could probably do better. Here's what I've learned from this business over here. There's a lot of learning associated with a business failure. There's a lot of cost associated with this as well.
I think part of the ecosystem is also your suppliers. I was helping a person as he was closing down his business, and he had, like $80,000 worth of debts, and, it was like $15,000 to a travel agent, couple $1,000 to a printer, a few $1,000s here and there. So it, as well as the staff costs, obviously, because people are invested in your company, and, depending on the economy at the time, you may not get a job back. But thinking about your supply chain, or your suppliers, your partners, your vendors, that cascades through the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think you both nailed it. I mean, you deal with more small businesses and work with more small businesses. Look, the personal cost is always the tough one, right? Because, the thing during the time I was, at UPS, and we purchased mailbox, et cetera, and rebranded to what's today the UPS store, those are all 100% franchisee owned. And for me, working in a large organization, you really understand what it means to be all in when you work with small business owners. Now, these are small business owners that are part of a franchise organization, but still, I mean, if you think about it, to me, what I learned is a small business owner takes everything they own, slides it across the table, and they're all in. No one's more all in than a small business owner. I mean, we all say we're all in. We have P&Ls and big companies, but you have a big company behind you, right? But this small business owner slid it in. And then the thing that always struck me, and I have the greatest respect for entrepreneurs and small business owners because of it, if you think about how it works with them, at the end of the day, they hit the cash register. The door opens. They pay their people. They pay their vendors. And what's left is what they bring home. That's the greatest all-in.
So many don't have the opportunity to take a paycheck after they've paid all those people.
Right. So I think that's the casualty, is that personal side of it. And, I would say the best chance you have of working through that prior to is by what we talked about a few moments ago, which is having a good plan. Did you have the working capital for 18 months? Or after 3 months, after 90 days, you're already in trouble? I mean, you really have to be able to protect yourself and your family by taking the time. And that's why a good coach, or a good mentor like Stephen and Peter, or understanding the mechanics of all that are so important. Once you get past the excitement of the idea, someone has to take the time to do the hard work of understanding how much is it going to cost? How long can I do this for? Because you're going to have issues in the first couple months, first 6-9 months. Do you have enough working capital to get you through that? And if you do, well, then you can kind of navigate the early ups and downs and make it. You might really have a great idea that if you just would have had 1 more month worth of working capital instead of 3 months, you would have had 10 months. Maybe in month 5, you might have turned this thing around, but you never know because you never gave yourself that chance. So I think as an entrepreneur, you have to give yourself a chance and your people a chance to be successful by putting together the right plan to do that. Because the casualties are the person, the individual side of things, as well as your personal reputation and ability to maybe do it again sometime.
Yeah, if I could jump in really quick, Trudy, on a quick story. I had a colleague who I had to coach through a business failure. He was a franchise owner who invested his retirement into this franchise, and he had to shut it down during the pandemic. And so, again, he had to come to that realization that this decision needed to be made. But during that process, he had to think about what's next. What do you do now? And he was able to pivot into another business opportunity that he launched and is now doing very successful as a result of that. So while we like to definitely think about all the different costs, the initial cost first is what's going on in your mindset, for sure.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to, when Stephen talked about the vendors and supply chain, when we had supply chain issues, I think they were triggered through COVID as well. There were many businesses that the reason why they were in trouble was because that particular component, they didn't have it, they couldn't get it. And that's a real ecosystem issue, because sometimes when my business closed down, the thing that I was providing to my clients is no longer available. And that can really trigger a whole ecosystem ripple effect. So it's not just my business is closed down. It's the ripple effect through not just the personal, but the vendors, the employees, the whole ecosystem, because everything is an ecosystem. Things come in, things go out. It's part of the ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, if I put a rubber band around my finger and I cut off the circulation, it's going to be a problem. It's just my little fingertip, but it is part of the ecosystem that is my body. So we really do maybe even our city and our country a disservice when we don't steward our businesses properly, which is hopefully what our listeners will get out of this, that it is beyond just initial business failure. There's more to it than that. All right. I really want to start with Rocky on this particular question, guys. So Rocky, Starbucks was a success under Howard Schultz. He passed the baton to Jim Donald. And when Jim Donald had it, it went into a hemorrhage and it was on the brink of failure. And then Schultz had to come back in and he turned it around. This was in 2009, which is during the recession. He turned it around. The same company that he left in good stands came back, found it on the brink of failure, and Schultz was able to turn it around and even take it beyond where he had originally left it. So I'm sure that Jim Donald was not just some random CEO pick. I'm sure there was some filtering going on there. So without really talking too much about the succession side of this, although succession, I think, is also a conversation we should have in another time. Why do you think one leader can make such a successful impact and another supposedly qualified leader could not?
Yeah, that's a interesting conversation. And obviously there's more than just there's the Home Depot side of it when they came back in. And, I look at Disney, right? I mean, I thought he probably thought he picked the right person to take his place. And, now he's back in there now. What a whole different set of circumstances. I will tell you, as many successes of those examples that there are, I will say one thing that I think everybody has to keep in mind. You can never bring the band back together again. You can bring the same players, but it's a different time. It's a different era. And so it's much more difficult. So because you've got the whole band reunited doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the same hits or going to have the same, success. So I think that's a concern, right? When you have to do that no matter what. And there are successes. I think I go back to, and I'm, maybe I'm consistent to a nauseum side of things. But so to me, I think what makes companies great is their consistency, right? It's their ability to answer those three questions as an organization which is who we are as a company, what do we stand for, and what are the things we won't compromise. Now, I know we talked about that for people, but it's the same with companies. And so as you bring people into the organization, yeah, they have their own style, they have their own vision, but at the end of the day, none of that should be in compromise of who we are as an organization, what we stand for, and what are the things we won't compromise. And it's funny, when you think about that, you think about how companies lose their way. And you think to yourself, well, how could that happen to an organization like that? And why they come back, as you talked about Starbucks or Home Depot, is they lose their way. And I think it's because they're not being true to that organizational vision of who we are, what we stand for, what we won't compromise. Now, even though times change, I'll give a good example. You know, if you're a retail organization and you know who you are as an organization, what you stand for, but you're never going to compromise service, or maybe not service, maybe it's the customer experience. Well, when you go to e-commerce, right, maybe the compromise that you made without realizing it is returns. The front side works out really good. People get online, they order quickly. The shipping costs of now you figured out a way to do good shipping costs. But what you've compromised is the return side of it, right? You don't realize it, but your return process is brutal. I don't get my money back right away. And so that's what you compromise. And so when you understand who you are, what you stand for, and as you start new things, as you start to change the organization, as you start to implement your new strategies or what your vision is to help grow the organization, you have to make sure you're never compromising who you are and what you are as an organization. And I think when you look at them when they came in, their intentions may have been good, but but they were really compromising who they were as an organization. And then people didn't recognize that organization because that's not who they believed that they were. And I think that, you know, if you think about the Home Depot, quick example, Home Depot prided themselves on the fact that when you walked into Home Depot, those associates were so well trained that they could tell you the size of it. You ask for a particular type of screw, they can tell you where aisle it was in, what bin it was in, and they made you, and they could tell you how to utilize that screw. But then the new people that came in decided that they really wanted to focus in on contractors. Well, if I'm a do-it-yourselfer, I'm not a contractor, and I'm walking in there and I'm asking a question, well, the new associates aren't trained that way anymore because the contractor knows where everything is. So people didn't recognize Home Depot anymore, which then allowed Lowe's to be a great competitor because Lowe's looked more like a traditional department store. So that's what I think is so important. So I think it's knowing who you are, what you stand for, what you won't compromise. And then as you take over or as you come in as a new person, you know, you clearly understand I could have my own vision. I could have my own way of doing it, but I have to do it within the confines of who we are, what we stand for, what we won't compromise. Because then people won't recognize us.
I think Bud Light's feeling a little bit of that. They should have heard what you said. You guys didn't. You want to contribute?
I think sometimes leaders chase that shiny object. And sometimes I said one time to a CEO, I said, you need to stop reading Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine because just because Jack Welch is on the cover and he's creating this conglomerate. I remember when somebody tried to create the conglomerate with the Westin Hotels, United Airlines, and I think it was Hertz Rental Car. And it's like, where is the business sense in this? Because Welch can do it over here in certain industries. You can't do it in other industries. So sometimes I think senior leaders, CEO leaders are you know, they're trying to mimic what other people are doing. And I remember when I worked at Citibank and there was Neutron Jack or Neutron John, somebody who was buying all these companies and he was firing employees, but keeping the assets, the hard assets, and it was called Re-Engineering the Corporation, a book that came out in the 80s. And I remember some leader at Citibank came in and tried to do the same thing. And when you fire all your employees, your customer service goes down the drain.
Yeah, yeah, Welch had that thing for a while. You remember the bottom 10% every year has to go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, but, you know, Lisa, another thing, I mean, you talk about one of the things I love today is I love when people are reevaluating this annual performance review cycle. You know, performance reviews sets up competition between your employees. But when the people on your team are competing with each other, they're not collaborating. They're not innovating together. And so when you have these forced ranking systems,
that's a conversation that's worth chasing too. That specific point you just made.
Exactly. You have these forced ranking systems, and then people, get forced down on a department level or a country level or an organization level. And do I want to cooperate? Do I want to cooperate with Peter if he and I are both going to be ranked on the same thing? Hell no, I'm not telling Peter my secrets. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, we used to always say we're not in competition with each other. We're in competition with the competition. Yeah.
But no.
Yeah. It's interesting. I sometimes think it's also situational as well. Who am I to be? I don't know if I'll be able to go into, Rocky had mentioned this earlier, into a UPS store and be very successful. My leadership may not fit right for that. Yeah, there are some commonalities among leadership skill sets, but it may not just be the right fit. Oftentimes, I think that those people who are passed on or the next CEOs, the fit may not. Doesn't mean that they're a bad leader. They've gotten to that point. They've done something right, but maybe the fit for that situation, even that time period, just was not the right time, situation, the place, everything like that as well. And we see that in so many different areas. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing all the time. We see CEOs get, just recently, the CEO of Walgreens, they had to part ways. Does that mean she's automatically the worst CEO, or that it's just time? So it's just food for thought. It's a great conversation that we could probably have for hours.
And yet she was ranked one of the top women executives in the world.
Yes. 20, just a few years ago.
20 months ago.
Right, exactly.
Or less. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at no different than if you want to be current, and you've got this whole controversy going on now with Weight Watchers, right? I mean, they're going round and round and round because they buy a company that now has the ability to write scripts for Ozempics. Okay, so here you are, a company that is known for how you eat. I was just reading about it today, as a matter of fact. They're known for their ability to change your eating habits. It's a lifestyle change to lose weight. We want to just write a script now, so that'll help you lose weight. I mean, so you think to yourself, how could you lose your way like that? I mean, like you forgot who you were. I mean, you're not even close to who you were. But, if you think about it, and you guys have seen this, I'm sure, one of the biggest marketing things that kills you inside a company, this is an editorial that may not necessarily represent the view of the station, but it's this whole concept that the marketing person comes into you and they always talk to you about this near neighbor. Well, let's go do this because this is near neighbor. And then you wake up one day as a company and you're like, I'm not in the same neighborhood. I'm not in the same state. I'm not even in the same country. I don't even know who I am anymore because you kept having me do new neighbor things. And I don't even know who I am as a company anymore. And everybody goes through that. And that's where the CEO then at that point, the senior leadership has to say, wait a second, who are we? What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? We don't even recognize ourselves anymore. And Trudy and I were talking about this one other time. The first 100 years of a company never guarantees the second 100 years. Mm. I mean, two companies I'll give you quickly. Over 100 years old, somewhere around 105, 107-year anniversary, they say to the CEO of Sears and Roebuck, how come you don't have a catalog anymore? Nobody's buying from catalogs anymore. I don't know. Can you get another catalog in the mail from Pottery Barn or Pottery Barn Kids or whatever else? More importantly, who's Amazon today? It's Sears. It's a Sears and Roebuck catalog on our computer, right? 100-something year anniversary, they say to the CEO of Woolworths, hey, how come that you guys are closing Woolworths? Nobody wants a 5 and dime. I don't know. Could you put another Dollar Tree under $5, whatever? There's one in every corner. You guys lost your way. You were serving food, for crying out loud, inside of Walmart. You could buy a TV in Walmart. That's not a Walmart. It's not a 5 and dime. Because what happens is everybody gets this near neighbor concept. This is how I'm going to grow my business because I need revenue or something happens. I think that's also what hurts, to your point on the CEOs, what happened at Starbucks, whatever. You come in with great ideas and then all of a sudden you try to change so much and you try to, like you said, everybody's chasing the next shiny object, and that's what gets them all in trouble. We're all a me too. No, that's not the right term now, but you can edit that out. we're like they say in football, right? Everyone's a copycat league, right? Everyone's a copycat league, right? You know, look at the other night, the Giants, right? The guy uses that push thing for the first time on the 4th and 1, right? And 2 guys get hurt because he doesn't really know how to do it. That's not you. You never practice it. What are you doing here? Well, companies do that same thing.
Wow.
So I wonder, Trudy, I got a question for you in your research, and I don't know Jim Donald very well, but or his style, but you know, Howard Schultz's strength was, and he used to say to Wall Street, "Don't invest in us because you're third on my list. My employees are first, my customers are second, my shareholders are third." Now, I don't know whether Dolan had a different attitude, and that's when he started managing the business for the shareholders. And of course, Schultz comes back and with the same philosophy and turns it around because he focused on his employees, number one, and his customers, number two. But I throw that question out as something worth looking into.
And Richard Branson says, if you take care of employees, they'll take care of the customers. So
exactly.
But you know, that speaks to leadership, though. Instead of just, you know, moving by default or moving to copy. Leadership is not copycat. Leadership is boy, I'm telling you, I think we might be tapping into that essence of what's missing right here in this little space of this conversation, because leadership is, I think there is something there, and I can't quite put my finger on it. There's tactics, there's strategies, and all of that, but there is, and I think that's why the great man theory was so alive for so long, because there's that essence that some people without any training or anything can just get up and just be great, fantastic leaders. And it's only in retrospect and in scientific study that we've started to break down and realize, no, we actually can train people to be leaders. But there is, I don't know what it is. There is a certain something.
Leadership is an art. Now, there's some science behind it.
Yeah.
And how you implement it. And, Peter's absolutely right. He knows himself. He may not be able to manage a UPS store franchise because that's not his characteristic. One thing I think about leaders is, I tell you what, if I led an organization today, I'd have to lead it very differently than the way I led an organization 5 or 6 years ago. Leaders have to adapt now to the people that they're leading. The old my way or the highway, employees adapting to me as a leader, is not going to work, particularly coming out of the pandemic, because people just decide, quite frankly, the war for talent is over and talent has won. And so people say, I don't need to go work for that person anymore. I can leave. I'll find another job somewhere. So I think leaders need to be more flexible and adaptable and agile in how they approach leadership. And
going back to Rocky was basically saying he cares for the people, and it's that's speaking to the person, your employee as a person, versus just moving them as assets. I don't know. I'm just student here.
Well, I think the other thing too is there are very few 1 or 2, 3 things that are going to be like the silver bullets or the quick hits. But I will tell you one thing that almost all successful leaders have, I think, and that's that they have the ability to check their egos at the door. And once you have your ability to check the ego at the door, then you become that individual who's willing to listen. Because when you think about a couple core strengths of leaders, they're good. Think about some of the best people we've interacted with, we've worked for, worked with, mentored us. They never had, they had an ego, but you couldn't find it, right? It was one they had personally in the confines of their own living room or whatever, right? But it never allowed them to run the business or how they did their jobs, right? Or how they dealt with you. And they were good listeners. Well, they were good listeners because they didn't have an ego, right? People with egos aren't willing to listen. It's my way or the highway. So I think there's a few. There are a couple of those kinds of things, and they're lifelong learners, which means if you're a lifelong learner, then you're willing to say, I don't know, I'll learn from you. And it's okay if you're a subordinate. So I think that, and that's how come I think that's why no matter what level you're in, because think about it, I'm sure all the way up to the top of these organizations, even these CEOs who get themselves in a bad predicament or it's time for them to move on. Well, all through the ranks, they were good. It wasn't that they, were bad. They know they had to have success to get there. And it wasn't that they, it's not the Peter principle, oh, you've risen to your level of comp. No, it's just that maybe they lost their way. Maybe they lost their ability to listen. Maybe their ego got too big. Maybe the pressure at that level. There are reasons for that. But I think ultimately, as a leader, you've got to be willing to subordinate yourself to your people and to the organization and to the greater good. And if you're not willing to do that, you're going to ultimately get yourself in trouble.
So let's dive into this leadership competence more specifically. We've kind of talked about it in a general sense. Let's kind of deep dive into it. How do you determine leadership competence with those you've worked with or you're willing to move up in the ranks? How do you determine their competence?
I asked them those powerful questions. I asked them what their values are, what their goals are, in order to see a lot about what we're talking about here. Are they able to be adaptable or flexible? Are they able to pivot? Are they fully aware, as Stephen has mentioned, that, like probably all of us here, when we were coming up, leadership was this: Peter, go do this. And I say, okay, I'm gone. I'm not even asking any questions. I'm gone. But today's staff and employees need to feel valued. They need to be connected to the mission and the vision more so than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. Am I aware of that as a leader? Do I recognize that? And so if I'm able to be very aware, going back to that self-awareness word again, then I'm able to understand and adapt to the needs of the organization and definitely, as we've been mentioning, to the needs of my staff and my employees. So there's a lot of self-awareness and other competencies in themselves, the values, the integrity that need to be really analyzed before you step into that role.
I like to focus on their growth mindset, and what I do if I'm coaching people now, or if I'm on a committee, like a hiring committee as their outside consultant, I'll ask the person, I'll say, okay, Rocky, tell me a situation, please, where you had to make a decision where you didn't have all the facts at hand. It was kind of turbulent times. You weren't sure about the economic conditions. And as I got at Rocky's response, I don't care about the success or failure of that decision. I want it because I'll follow up and say, okay, what did you learn about your team when you in that situation? And more importantly, what did you learn about yourself and your decision making in that situation? And that's what I want to hear from somebody is their competency. Because I can go into all kinds of things if I understand that, what their listening skills, their evaluation skills, their thinking skills, their communication skills, their ego, how much of it that their accountability, how much of that self accountability do they reflect in their response to those three questions.
Yeah, no, I think you both, I'm listening and I think you both are spot on with it. I would just add simply that I'm always kind of analyzing or kind of understanding their strategic mind, right? The tactical mind, I can understand, it's before me, right? The tactical you can see through their results but the strategic side of things is really the differentiator, right? So you've got this list of competencies that everybody can rattle off, but do you understand the strategic side of those competencies when, you understand that revenue's down and, you start going through the whole process of sales? That's all tactical, how you're going to go after the sales and how you're filling the funnel. But now what I'm trying to understand is, and I think you probably articulated it better, Stephen, than I am right now, which is, okay, do you understand that it's what's happening in the marketplace, right? That's a strategic side of it. I understand that customers are leaving, or we have churn, or you're giving me all the numbers and all the skills to go back and get them. But strategically, do you understand why that happened? If you don't, then you'll miss it again the next time. And you won't know how to fix it the next time, or you won't get ahead of it the next time. So I think that I'm listening and I'm watching them perform, or I'm looking at the way they go about their business or how they manage. What's their strategic competency? Because if they have a good strategic competency and they've got a vision from a strategic point of view, they're going to be ultimately your best performers, right? Because They understand that strategic side of things. Tactically, there's a lot of people that can be good tactically. It's that strategic person that makes the adjustments, because strategic people make adjustments. They make halftime adjustments where most people don't.
For a business to survive year 1 and make it to year 7, what are some of the basic leadership competencies? And you kind of alluded to the strategic stuff, but what are even some of the tactical? What are some of those competencies that they really need to have in place? So think of the person who's starting up that organization. They may not have that self-awareness. Hopefully this will give them the self-awareness that maybe they don't have this skill or they don't have that competency. What would be a quick list for them to kind of evaluate? Do I have this? Do I need to hire that? And then on a part B, what's the chance one person has all those competencies?
I'll tell you the two on top of my list are delegation and effective feedback. Not feedback, because feedback is often, you did this wrong, but effective feedback. But delegation, I think one of the problems with entrepreneurs or small business owners, or I'd say the same thing about first-time managers, first-time leaders in organization. They're afraid to delegate. They want to do it all themselves. They can do it faster, but their role is not to execute. Going back to what Rocky was just saying, the tactical stuff. Their job is to be the thinker, and you need time to think, and you can't think if you're doing all the time. So delegation to me is number one, and the ability to provide effective feedback would be number two.
Let me jump in here real quick. Decades ago, I worked as the executive assistant for a C-suite person at a big organization. And the person I was, she was a vice president. When she got the job, she was elevated from her former position, which she excelled at. But she had a secretary at that level. But when she moved up, they didn't allow her to take her secretary with her because they wanted that secretary to stay for the new persons coming in so that they'd have some kind of help with understanding their new role. So they hired me, and she kept bypassing me to go back to her secretary, or she did a lot of the things herself. And I busied myself because I didn't want to take these people's money and not be just sitting there twiddling my thumb. So I went around to the company and I was helping everybody else and their assistants. And then finally, the HR person says, "Don't you have something to do for her?" I'm like, "She's not giving me anything to do." And they had a conversation with her about, you need to step into this role. She was still doing her old job. She had not, and I was young then, so I don't know what was happening back then, but she got this new job, and I don't think she wrapped her head around the new job. And I had to go to her. I said, "I'm a very competent woman. I can do everything that lady was doing for you, and this is a new role. Use me." Anyway, so the delegation thing, I think, okay, so let me shut up now. You guys talk.
Yeah, I love that, Trudy. Thank you so much for identifying what that looks like in real time, for sure. I love what Stephen had mentioned. One of the things that I always have to talk about with leaders, it seems like lately a lot too, is stop working so hard. Let me rephrase it for you. Stop getting your hands so dirty. It is your responsibility to delegate, to plan, to strategize. That's where you need to be leaving room for. Stop getting in mud. And sometimes that's hard for new leaders, especially, to trust their people that they're okay. And listen, the only way that they're going to become empowered and do things the right way is if you trust them to be able to do that. But I'm even seeing some seasoned leaders still stepping into that ever so often. And so I love that about leaving space for strategy, leaving space for planning, leaving space to think, as Stephen has mentioned. But yes, that delegation thing is so, so important. A phrase that I use so regularly is lead collectively, manage individually. Right? Lead collectively, manage individually. And so now, yes, you're delegating, but know who you're delegating to. Know their strengths, know their weaknesses a little bit so you can set them up for better success as well.
Yeah, I would say, just to wrap it up, delegation, obviously, my second one would be that as an entrepreneur now, this is, hey, you have to understand that finance is the language of business. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to make money. And so understanding finance. And so, if you're weak in that area, there's nothing to be ashamed of or nothing to be embarrassed about, but you better learn it or find the right person to have that conversation with, or to be your mentor, or to be your person. So I would say delegation, and I would say understanding that finance is the language of business, and understand who's out there to help you out. I'd also add, when it comes to the delegation side of things, is that I think one of the things that I learned. So I had the opportunity to work in a company of promotion from within. So, and my dad, rest his soul, told me two things when I started my job. He said to me, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you, and then learn your job and learn some more. So every time someone tapped me on the shoulder, hey, we got this new opportunity for you, we got this new responsibility, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But what I can hear my dad saying is, hey, whatever they ask you to say yes and thank you. And the greatest lesson I learned from that, which then helped me, I think, grow as a leader, is UPS believed in Rocky Romanello way ahead of Rocky Romanello believing in himself. And so as leaders, when you put that person in that new position, even though that may be their fifth promotion, it may be they went from being a junior accountant to now CFO. That's still a new role for them. They've never been a CFO before. And as the CEO who just promoted that person, if you want to take it to that extreme, or that frontline supervisor, as Stephen said, is just learning, or Peter said, is just getting a new job. Your job is you have to believe in them until they're ready to believe in themselves. And if you do that, then they're more apt to be open to learning, and they put less pressure on the people that are in their care, right? Because they're trying to learn that new CFO role. That woman that you were talking about, Trudy, she was probably in this new job, got a promotion, was so concerned that she's going to embarrass herself, or may not be ready for it, or was going to make mistakes, and people are going to say, well, she didn't deserve the job, that the easiest thing for her to do was go to that person who did the job for her. It was clearly wrong, obviously. It didn't make you feel good about yourself, but it was her boss that should have been like, hey, it's okay. You got a new person. We know you're working through this, and you believe in them until they're ready to believe in themselves. Then you get that break-even point where, okay, you've grown, developed, you've got more experience, you feel good about yourself. Now you start to step back as that person. Now you become the cheerleader. You don't need to overmanage them anymore. You don't micromanage that person. Now you're like, good job, keep up the good work. And I think we sometimes lose that no matter what level you're in an organization, if that's the first day of that new job at that level, you're almost feeling like a day one person again. And they need your support. They need your belief. And then that, by you doing that, helps them to believe in their people.
When we're talking about surviving, past year one and making it to year 7, that's all fine and well. But one thing you bring to this conversation, Rocky, is you mentioned that UPS is a huge organization, and it took over all these franchises. When you have your little operation, okay, that's fine. But when we're talking about growing and scaling, you automatically bring more people into that equation, and you can't start that second store in that second location until you have those additional people. There's no way one person can be in 2 places at one time. So leadership comes into play now beyond just even running a good ship, because now you have a fleet, and that's probably another conversation for another day.
Well, that's why when you talk about succession planning and you think about the skill sets you need for people in succession planning, oftentimes one of the skill sets or one of the areas that people need to, kind of work on is span of control. Span of control, whether it's going from one person to 10 people, or span of control in terms of geography. I mean, when you're running a geography, that's maybe the state of New Jersey, to running, the whole country, it's span of control, and same thing with numbers of people. So I think that's part of it. And I think what people don't understand from an entrepreneurial point of view is it's difficult to go from that 1 to 2 employees, 3 to 4. When you're managing a large groups of people, let's say you have let's say you're a small business with 40 people and 4 people are struggling. That's 10% of your workforce. If you have 2 employees and 1 is bad, 50% of your workforce. Yeah. So I think that's the concern that small business owners have. I really can't afford that. So it's that whole process of understanding that you have to train, how to delegate, but it's also that I have to let go. You know, I always tell the story that, you know, you get into a retail organization and now they realize it's peak season, it's Christmas, and it's a small boutique shop, and they realize they have to hire people. And so now there's 2 or 3 people on the floor helping the customers. And so, okay, they made the big giant move. And then where's the line now? It's at the cash register, because the only person that can use the cash register is the owner, because he doesn't trust anybody with the money. So we took the problem of the bottleneck of people having someone on the sales floor to, we don't trust anybody to handle the money. So therefore the bottleneck's the line of checking out. And so our customers are unhappy. So once you make that step to delegation, you have to understand what it is I'm delegating, and people, their authority has to equal their responsibility. That's why delegation never works. You gave me the authority, the responsibility to do something, but you never give me the authority to make the decision.
Wow.
You got to give me the authority to go to the responsibility. And that's what generally fails in delegation, especially in small business. It's because I always, 1 to 2 means if that person doesn't do a good job, I'm 50% of us, I'm already 50% down. So the numbers don't help them when it comes to delegation.
That sounds like another conversation to chase on another day too, Rocky. I'd love to dive deeper into that later. Wow. And that speaks to growth, and that's 100% leadership right there. When you get to that stage, there is no more getting your hands dirty, as Peter said. You're really now running people. You're not even running the job anymore. All right. So,
you know, Peter said something before that, and I've kind of got it written down in a mental note here, but I think he said before, when he said about, you know, feedback, you know, and I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, that's a point that sometimes people don't spend enough time talking about. Nobody likes having those difficult conversations.
Yeah, with Stephen, feedback, effectively.
And I agree with you 100%. I mean, you look at how companies or organizations or small businesses get so far away from where they could be or should be. It's because they don't have those difficult conversations. You know, I always say you shouldn't lose a customer that you don't choose to lose, but you may lose some customers you choose to lose. You know, when employees turn over, you have to look in the mirror. Maybe there are some employees that need to go, but you always got to ask yourself why. Almost always, it starts with some conversation you could have had with a customer, or a conversation you could have had with an employee that you never have because it's a difficult one. You'd rather not have that conversation. And I think that point you made is, it doesn't matter the size of the organization. You have to be willing to have those difficult conversations. And I think that's such an important piece you said. And I think sometimes we don't talk a lot about that. Great leaders give feedback, but give the good feedback and the positive feedback, but aren't afraid that to do it in a polite, respectful, professional way. But they have those difficult conversations, and that's what differentiates them from everybody else as great leaders. That's your only chance of saving somebody in your organization, is when you have a difficult conversation.
Wow. So there are many strategies and tools for measuring leadership competence. I know we talked about when you're interviewing them and you ask those evaluation questions and all that. There's some actual tools like the 360-degree feedback, the leadership competency assessment, the key performance indicators, KPIs, employee surveys. And, you know, there are also SWOT analyses, all of these different kinds of things. Or how should business leaders utilize these tools, and what are the benefits from using them? Should they use them?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I've been reiterating this phrase or this word so often so far in our conversation, is self-awareness. But also, if I'm a leader, I want to know the personalities and understanding of those around me. So let's start off with the self-awareness. How am I leading? How am I landing? You know, am I communicating effectively? Am I delegating effectively? Oftentimes those 360s do a good job of identifying what we need to continue to grow on in our leadership capabilities. But at the very least, some of these personality assessments allow us to see, hey, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? How do I show up during stressful situations and scenarios, right? We think we know, oftentimes we have no idea, right? And so oftentimes
they're objective feedback.
Absolutely. And so oftentimes these assessments will allow us to hold the mirror up in front of ourselves to improve, to grow, to become lifelong learners, first for ourselves, but then also for our staffs and our employees as well.
So I have a business coach, and I'm sure you guys have had coaches and mentors yourself. And right now you guys are in a season where you are using your knowledge and your life history and yourself influencing and sharing your expertise. As we're wrapping up, what is one piece of advice or strategy that you've learned over time that if the audience left with nothing else, if they remember nothing else, that you feel that at the minimum they should get this one thing? What would it be? Let's start with Rocky.
Well, I always challenge people in a positive way to answer this question, which is, what is the one word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? So what's that word? And when it's funny, I get an opportunity to speak to conferences, but the most fun I have is when I'm speaking to either junior, senior class in high school, junior, senior class in college. I just did one a few weeks ago so I asked that question. Of course, everybody always answers what they think you want to hear. Energetic, decisive, one kid says rich. Okay, that's all great. But what's the word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? And so for me, the word was thoughtful. I wanted to be a thoughtful leader. I wanted to be considered a thoughtful leader. Why that word to me, not the word thoughtful, why choosing that word is so important to me is because once you understand that word and what it is that you want someone to describe you at the end of this run, what you do is throughout your career, then you start to build a mosaic to that word. So as a thoughtful leader, to me, I want to think of things from its widest consequences. Every decision we made, I wanted to make sure our people, our customers, our share owner stakeholders were represented at the table of discussion. Sometimes one led more than the other. But that, to me, thoughtful is, I know sometimes we had the unfortunate situation where you had to let somebody go, but you wanted to do it in a thoughtful manner. You wanted to do it respectfully. You wanted to do it in a way that you tried to get them to understand why this is happening, what they could have done differently, what you could have, whatever those things are to me. So I think that's the challenge I think people should think about is, what is that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? And then you'll stay true to that, and that becomes your brand. That becomes your brand promise. Yeah, what's your word?
My word is trustworthy. And it's actually influenced. My name is Trudy. It's not Gertrude. It's not short for anything. It's Trudy. And when I was young, I just felt like true was a huge piece of my name. And although it's not Terry, I just locked onto that as a kid. And I've just always wanted to be known or, for people to see me as trustworthy. That's just been my word.
So everything you do, you'll be building a mosaic to that without realizing it. And so that's when someone says someday, hey, did you know Trudy? Yeah. What was she like? Trustworthy. I mean, and I think that's what starts to begin to be that core. And that's when someone says, well, who are you? What do you stand for? And someone says, hey, Trudy, what won't Trudy compromise? If I got a chance to work for Trudy, what won't she compromise? Hey, you better have good integrity. You better be where you say you're going to be. You better do the things you're going to say you're going to do. That's that trustworthiness. And that becomes your brand. It becomes your brand promise as an individual leader.
I gotta jump in with how are you showing up? How are you showing up? And if you don't know, it might be time to ask somebody. Right? Ask those around you. Ask colleagues, ask your accountant, right? For that matter. How are you showing up and what do you need to tweak as a result of that?
That's powerful, Peter, because my word is trustworthy, but if I asked around, maybe I would not get that feedback. Right. Exactly. I'd like to think I would, because I've built that mosaic as Rocky's talking about, but you never know. Sometimes you think that's how you show up. And that's not actually how you show up. And that's actually interesting. Okay.
I would add to that. I love that, Peter, because I often tell people leadership is not what you do. Leadership is what you are, what you be, and showing up is what you be. My advice, to answer your question, is and it's one I share with everybody, is very simple. Never stop learning, because life never stops teaching. So just have that continuous learning mindset, whether you're a leader, an individual contributor, a parent, a high school student, whatever. Just never stop learning.
So I have three amazing men here who have amazing contribution to leadership in their own way. And you may resonate with any one of them or different ones of them. And so what I'm going to ask you guys to do now is to just share what it is, your public offer, especially if it has to do with leadership competence, whether it's your book, your course, your whatever it is. What is that offer that you have? Because I know you're all serving and in mentoring and coaching at some level. So please let the audience know.
My 8-module online leadership program, and it's designed for first-time leaders. It's called The Art of Great Leadership, but it's designed really for, what both Rocky and Peter were referring to earlier, people who got promoted for the first time into a manager, supervisor, leadership position, and they're lost. And so we cover feedback, we cover delegation, we cover communicating as a leader, we cover setting visions and all that stuff.
You reach out to me on my website for sure at shiftyourmindset.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well in order for coaching or for consulting with your organization for that matter. So, wow. Absolutely. Trudy, we're doing it. We're doing it.
Certainly at this point in my career, I'm doing keynote speaking and training. So I do have a podcast, a 3 to 5 minute podcast that goes out every Tuesday and Thursday. It's called The Leadership Library. I put it together because I felt like there were, people don't have a lot of time, and sometimes they're sitting there wondering about different things that are happening within their organization, happening to them as new leaders or new managers. And so I put together, I have 105 episodes so far. I've got another till the end of the year, season 7. So feel free to check out the Leadership Library, and in my book, Tighten the Lug Nuts. It's easy because I only have one, so it's easy for me to remember. Poor Stephen could be here reading off 22. But I only have to read one. If you have any questions, I'm rockyromanella@gmail.com. If I can help in any way, obviously, on a serious note. Appreciate Trudy. A pleasure, Stephen, meeting you. And Peter, you're both so well established and incredible. And I sat here, I learned a tremendous amount listening to both of you. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Trudy, to be on this, and a pleasure to meet both of you. I feel like I've got some notes. I haven't had a chance to write them down. I'm going to sit down afterwards, and I take the time to write down the things I learned. I certainly learned a lot from both of you.
Same here.
So, gentlemen, I so appreciate you. I can't tell you. I believe that we have a treasure of information here. I really appreciate what you guys have done for me. This is huge. I think it's sad because by the time organizations will bring in guys like you, they're usually a more established organization that has managed to get through the rocky starts, but not everybody has that. And by the time they get to the point where they're willing to get mentorship and leadership, they're kind of established, and they're not even getting it for themselves. They're usually getting it for their underlings, which is still sad. So I would love to get ahead of the curve and let these startups understand they really should, right out the gate, have that mentor. Don't assume you have the competence to run a successful business, and you may be extremely competent at what you do, but that doesn't mean you're going to be competent running a business. So thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you.